We live in uncertain times. Going through our daily lives, daily rituals, those uncertainties can seem miles away. But eventually, they close in and start knocking at your front door. And your cozy little morning is now completely ruined. A different path led you down this life. Is it too late? Could you be something more? Do you even want to be something more? Your lived experience changed your ambitions, and that thing you had once chased for so long, always out of breath, always just out of reach, now seems like a complete waste of time. But you're getting older and more useless, and you can't even name one Taylor Swift song. When did you get so old? Did this happen while you were pushing that rock up the hill? So fixated on reaching the top for a break, only to realize you'd have to start over again tomorrow? Albert Camus said, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy, because the alternative is a grim future." Or is that what it means? Is that how you say his name, Camus? I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm struggling to think through any of these existential thoughts because I wore the wrong shoes and my feet are killing me, and there's nowhere to sit and stare dramatically into the void. But what if there was? What if I could ease my existential misery with a park bench of my own fabrication? But if you're watching this, that means you too share the burden of life and the inescapable knowledge of impending mortality. So let us contemplate these inevitable forces together on a park bench for heavy contemplation. The double-edged sword of becoming older and more useless is often paired with wisdom. Use this wisdom to finally make a set of plans for your bench. Although spontaneity and improvisation has its benefits, it's a younger man's game and will inevitably lead you down a winding path unsure of where it will lead. Also, it's not conducive to finishing a YouTube video. Remember those fur slabs you bought off of Facebook Marketplace that have been taking up far too much room in your woodshop for the past 2 years? In an unprecedented turn of events, it's now time to finally use them. Retrieving them will also make for great YouTube content, as it's extremely cumbersome and dangerous retrieving them above a flight of stairs. Inspect the moisture of the wood. It's at 15%, which is not ideal, but be damned if you're going to wait any longer. Take out your ancient draw knife and start hacking away at that bark. Sometimes the bark is hard and stubbornly stuck to what it knows, and sometimes it pulls off easy and goes with the flow. Wow, just like life, huh? One of the slabs will be made into the legs, so no debarking is required. A straight line is all that is necessary, and while there's a multitude of better ways to do this, you'll have to work within your means. Point in case, a Festool track saw would be the ideal tool for this job, but all you have is a circular saw. But the blade is dull and your circular saw has been losing power, so settle for the inaccuracy of a jigsaw. Will this cause substantially more work and a headache in the future? Absolutely. It's time to start measuring and sketching out the legs. Make a vague sketch, then go for a more exact scientific method, utilizing the state-of-the-art technology of the nail and old saw method of plotting curvature, the same method Einstein used to explain the curvature of space-time. You'll cut the chair leg with a jigsaw, but this will come back to haunt you when the blade flexes, leaving you with something closer to an 80-degree cut instead of the clean 90 you needed. You do have a bandsaw, but it's ancient and wildly unsafe. Last time you thought you'd fixed it, you turned it on and it went berserk. You had to flee in terror and dive for the plug before it could unleash chaos on the rest of your workshop. Going to cut the cross pieces that join the front and back legs together. Speaking of which, we'll take the piece to the jointer. The piece is cut once more, but you cleaned your woodshop so well that you forgot where you put your favorite push stick. You have many regrets. One not being the crosspiece cut, as it came out about satisfactory. A little more trimming on the legs, and this piece will come out exactly as you want. It's time to explore the real possibility that this experiment has all been for naught, that this bench will not work as intended, or as an implement for rest at all. You muster the courage to fake sit in the chair, and to your complete amazement, find that it does indeed work as originally intended. The next phase of production may continue whether or not you want it to. The bench may hold under the weight of a single board, but you're worried about its weight-bearing capacity. What happens if in the near future you gain hundreds of pounds? Will you be able to contemplate on this bench as a 400-pound man? 500-pound man? How fat will you be able to get until you can no longer contemplate on your park bench? You'll have to go off script and improvise, cutting your cross pieces into mortise and tenons. This will take 2 inches from the total length of the legs. Is this a bad idea? It's very possible, but you move forward in the face of uncertainty, cutting those tenons, knowing the implementation is sloppy at most. But you have the bravery to shoo away that little part in the back of your brain telling you, this is a bad idea. Or, as the French would say, très dans le mieux, going forward despite inevitable failure. I know this as someone who has been to France, and let me tell you, they say this all the time. Remember cutting the legs with the jigsaw? Well, that was also a bad idea. But regrets are like anchors, dragging you back to the past. But I am here to make up for the past by trying to cut the leg pieces as straight as I can for where the backrest shall lie. Cutting this piece straight will also make the mortises easier to cut out, I would suppose. As a side note, shaping these mortises took most of my day and still turned out terrible. A mixture of various tools and methods worked out to be the most efficient way to not making an effective mortise. Despite the setbacks, progress was being made. You'll cut out the backrest of your bench and clamp it into place to get a lay of the land. As it turns out, these live edge pieces are not wide enough to fill a reasonably sized posterior or rest a reasonably sized back. You'll have to make both pieces much wider, which means you'll have to go back and get another slab of fur and start all over again. That means risk of falling downstairs, hacking away at the bark, cross-cutting, rip-cutting, frustration with your circular saw, frustration with your jigsaw, jointing, planing, and all the rest. You'll try and clean out the marks in the wood, but the tiny diamond blade tool does a really crappy job. Experimenting with various ways to join these boards, you pull out your $1,300 Festool domino joiner. Just kidding, you ran to Harbor Freight and picked up a $30 doweling jig. You mark both pieces of wood for proper synchronization, then fumble getting your board into your less than ideal clamp. But to your surprise, the doweling jig works pretty good. Do a dry fit. Remember, keeping expectations low and prepare for failure. That way, even if it works out, you won't be disappointed. Always use Titebond 3 glue on outdoor projects because it is waterproof. Make sure to get it on video that you're using the correct glue, as commenters on your video will be sure to call you out otherwise. It's time for the glue up. Use your fingers to spread the glue, all of your fingers, and part of your hands too. This will make it a lot easier to operate and move the camera around directly after shooting this shot. Try different positions in which to bind the boards together. Due to the nature of this glue up, it will be much more difficult to use the clamps without damaging the live edges. But as Winston Churchill once said, a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. That being said, this park bench is stupid and is way too much work. Glue up the legs. Remember that little voice in the back of your brain telling you that this is a bad idea? Well, now you get to see the fruits of your sloppy labor. The tenons don't seem to fit just right. There's big gaps. It's cattywampus. Trop de la mieux. Indeed. In a matter of frames, the glue has hardened and the piece is ready to be sanded down. Maybe, perhaps by some kind of miracle or willful blindness, the sanding will close the gaps in our piece. The backrest and seat slabs are too large to fit through the planer, so we'll have to flatten them the old-fashioned way with the hand plane, just as our forebears did. On the bright side, the manual labor makes for some satisfying kinetic action, perfect for YouTube, just as our ancestors surely foresaw. More work is still yet to be done. Cutting off stray pieces that don't quite line up will make the seat rest a little less wobbly. Using a 1/2-inch roundover bit on the router will draw one's attention away from the obvious mistakes and towards a possible misperceived perception of quality. After sanding off the burn marks from your router, cut the legs down so that the sitting position is in a more relaxed angle. This will take multiple trial and errors, but showing one pass on camera gets the point across. A final trimming of the seat and back slabs to make them the same length is a good idea too. It's time to start drawing out the arms. Grab an old paint can to trace an arch, then rough cut it to size on the table saw. Sure, you had dimensions laid out in the original plans, but things have changed, making this the perfect moment to abandon precision and embrace improvisation. Cut the pieces into the horizontal and vertical run to get two 1.5-inch pieces. To make it look a little more fancy, we're going to connect these two pieces using a joint that's a close relative to the mortise and tenon called the bridle joint. We've already made this project more complicated than it needs to be, so let's continue with the flow of over-complexity. Cutting the mortise on the table saw with a horizontal clamp had a higher likelihood of kickback and started giving me flashbacks of our last lantern project, so remain far out of the imminent danger zone when cutting. The bridle joint actually came together quite well and was a surprise, especially after the sloppy and half-assed nature of the mortise and tenon joint debacle. We're going to refine the shape of our arms for a more pleasing aesthetic. Easier said than done though. Remember how the jigsaw left us with a less than 90-degree cut? This time, we're going to take a different approach, using a router. First, we'll cut along the pencil line with a shallow 1/2-inch router bit. Then, we'll finish the rest with the jigsaw. The third step is to use a flush trim router bit to square things up a bit more. Why settle for a simple one-step cut when you can make it more complicated with 3? More gluing and round over routing for the arms. This piece still has plenty of knots and imperfections, so we're going to fill them up with epoxy. Tape the underside of the piece to trap the epoxy within the wood. Then pour the epoxy and hardener in some paper cups in a convoluted measuring system that could have been made infinitesimally easier. But why do something simple when you can make it unnecessarily complex? Add a random amount of black pigment to the epoxy and mix it in. This will make the epoxy stand out, as will the imperfections in the work and the wood. As they say in the world of technology, the imperfections aren't a bug, they're a feature. Liberally apply the epoxy into the wood with a sort of devil-may-care attitude. Will this create more work and hassle in the future? It very well may, but you don't have that much experience with epoxy, so let's all just hope for the best. But I also planned for the worst, and while it wasn't quite that, it definitely wasn't the best. It took up a good part of the day taking the hand planer to scrape off and then sand off the excess epoxy. Take out the standard measuring and circumferential tool, which is the paint can, and trace where the legs will be shaped further. Connecting the slabs to the leg will require an intermediary piece, so let's route out a small hole for our lag bolts to fit into. But what will make this piece stand out? Perhaps walnut armrest from my premium bucket of dark hardwoods nestled safely in the corner within the confines of my wood shop. We'll cut this dark hardwood into 2 pieces, one for each armrest, then carefully measure out the height of the table saw blade to cut a channel for which the armrests will slide into. A little chiseling will be required, but don't spend too much time on it. I certainly didn't, because there's no point on spending time on something that won't be seen. Just ask my other YouTube channels. At this point, make more of a hassle for yourself by gluing 2 pieces together at their ends. Why did you do it this way? It made sense to you at the time, but actually created a lot more work. Were you hungry? Delusional? Who knows? But like most of this project, why do something the correct way once when you can do it 3 times over? Spend an excessive amount of time with more chiseling for a feature that you're going to abandon anyways. Then take a 1/2-inch roundover bit on the ends and call it a day. The roundover bit makes everything better. We'll drill a 1/2-inch hole for a 3/8-inch screw because we all need a little breathing room. We'll now connect the connecting piece to the legs with a few pilot holes and glue. Try different methods of connecting your legs to the bottom slab. Initially, the bottom slab comes together well, but try to put the opposite leg on with a slab that isn't 90 degrees and is of an odd shape, and you'll soon realize the conundrum. As I've ranted about before, woodworking is mostly about measuring to relativity, and if there's not an absolute straight edge on the slab, well, you see where I'm going with this. After half an hour of messing with various positions off camera, set your bench up in its final position and start gluing and screwing from there. Guess what? After your girlfriend tried out the chair, it was way too tall. So back to cutting down the legs like you had done 3 times before. Your bench is fully usable, so finally take a break and test it out. It's been a lot of work for something just to sit on, and you still have more to go. We'll attach the arms with some pilot holes, screws, and then some dowels to cover up said holes. Attach the armrest with a healthy amount of glue, clamps, and patience. It's okay if you only have 2 of those things, as the patience was omitted days ago. Sand down the piece with a few different sandpaper grits. Listening to some podcasts or music will help with the monotony of sanding and life in general. Find an ancient bottle of mineral spirits that has laid dormant in your garage for literal decades and fumble with the cap for 2 minutes on camera before spreading it on your piece. This will prep the bench for the waterproof finish soon to be lathered on. Brush the waterproofing and finish into your bench. Is it exactly how you imagined it would look? No, but throw that little thought into the Chateau d'If dungeon of your mind. The same dungeon where Edmond Dantes, from the book The Count of Monte Cristo, learned the skills he needed to enact his revenge. Did I mention I've been to France? We live in uncertain times, and there's not much you can do about it. But what you can do is build a park bench. It might not have turned out exactly like you wanted it to, but at least there's somewhere to sit while you watch the world go by. Right now, it's cloudy outside, but one day, the sun will come out again. Camus once said, "We must imagine Sisyphus happy." He had a goal every morning and a purpose and hope that drove him to push that rock up that hill. That should make anyone happy.